joining us here, Dr. Mukherjee, on the India Today eConclave. Remember, the viewers, you can ask some questions as well on social media. All our sites are open for this eConclave. Dr. Mukherjee, I want to start with New York, the city where you are, your professional choice of work. Arguably the global corona capital of the world, more than 11,000 deaths in New York, 34,000 across the United States. What has coronavirus meant for the United States and New York, this open, free society that saw itself as a world superpower at the cutting edge of health and science? Has this been a wake-up call?
Well, of course, it's been a wake-up call. It's been a wake-up call for the entire world, I would say. You know, it is fair to say that New York is, as you very well know, under lockdown, shutdown. For a while, the hospitals were overwhelmed. We are now seeing the peak has now gone down for the last few days of deaths and ICU admissions. So it seems that the worst of the storm may have passed. But again, we're still under lockdown, and there is a very great fear that if we open too quickly, then we will get a second resurgence of the virus, and again, another set of ICU admissions and deaths. As far as a wake-up call, yes, of course, it's been a wake-up call for the entire country. I think in America, the realization that there were fundamental systems that were not working optimally, broken, became obvious. You can liken it to America having a full body CAT scan, the whole American medical system, and in fact, the American economic system having a full body CAT scan. And that CAT scan has revealed some strengths and heroism among people, but has also revealed, like CAT scans do, the malignancies that were hidden, the points of weakness, the vulnerabilities that were hidden.
You know,
just to give you some examples of this, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, two things are happening simultaneously. One is that for a while, doctors and nurses couldn't find an N95 respirator, the kind that you use to protect yourself against a virus infection. If you're a doctor or nurse, you couldn't find them. So that shows you one peak or one edge. On the other edge of American innovation, there are now at least a promising-looking drug candidate and very promising-looking antibody combinations, cocktails, that the American scientists, American ingenuity is producing. And in fact, this has been also a wake-up call about how global and how cooperative research can be, and when it's done properly, how quickly you can respond to a pandemic.
I'm going to come to that research in a moment, Dr. Mukherjee, but I want to ask you this question. As I said, the world, especially India, has always looked at America as the global leader in the medical space. Are there any lessons, therefore, that India can learn from the American experience over the last month?
The first and most important lesson is to be prepared. And preparation makes all the difference. We are now, as we analyze the number of days that went by before the United States had a good detection kit. I did a calculation yesterday. You would be shocked at the calculation. The first case was reported in the United States on January 21st. This was in Washington State, near Seattle. The first case was reported in January 21st. The first proper kits for detection weren't really available until the first week of March. So we're talking about 40 days. Now, the virus, all viruses have a number attached to them, which we call R0. R0 is the number of people that you can spread the virus to. Some viruses have an enormous number. Measles is, you spread it to many, many people. Other viruses have a very small R0. It depends, of course, on the community. If you're very close together, the R0 increases. If you're very far apart, the R0 decreases. one of the reasons to keep people under lockdown is to bring the R naught below below 1. Sorry. Now, if you just understand, just simple virology 101, as it were, if that number is greater than 1, if you are infecting more than one person, then the rise of infections is exponential. You will infect 3 people, 3 will infect 9 people, 9 will infect, 27, and so forth. Right. If you calculate R naught, I did this calculation last night, late in while I was finishing up a paper. If you calculate R naught from those 40 days that we didn't have a detection kit, we weren't in quarantine, etc., that number is 1.2 or something to the power of 17.
Wow.
That is several hundred times the entire human population from that one patient. If you assume that one patient infected 3 patients a day and those 3 infected 3 more, it's 3 to the power of 40, which is 100 times or maybe 1,000 times. I don't even remember the entire size of the human population. It's more stars than there are in our galaxy, again by several hundred times. So preparation is key.
Mm-hmm.
There's several elements to this preparation.
Yes. But Dr. Mukherjee, what you're saying, therefore, brings me to the next question. You wrote so brilliantly on the history of cancer in the Emperor of All Maladies. Cancer was seen as the great enemy in a way at the time. What makes corona so different to cancer or any other medical challenge that mankind has been confronted with? This contagion that is spreading right across the world, crossing all boundaries. What makes corona so different to what we've seen of any virus also in the past?
Well, so there are 2 features that are particularly complicated, and there may be more than that, but there are 2 features. Feature number 1, which is probably the most important and was recognized quite late, is that asymptomatic carriers can carry the virus and spread it. That means that or pre-symptomatic carriers. In other words, you may feel completely fine, but you may be spreading the virus. This is very unique. This is not the case, for instance, for corona's cousin called SARS. It's not the case, as far as we know, for corona's cousin, another cousin called MERS, both of which are very dangerous viruses. The lethality of SARS is actually much greater than the lethality of corona. So that's one feature. And the second one is exactly what I just talked about, is that if you don't have any protection, the so-called R naught of the virus, the number of people that you can infect, if you are a real viral carrier, is very large. Now, even within that, there are some people that we're now identifying called super spreaders. And we don't know why, but their viral load, as well as the amount of viral load that they're expelling into the world, is actually even an exponent higher than the others. So these 2 features, I mean, we can keep on talking more and more about corona, but these
Sure.
2 features are really unique about this virus and make it very hard to contain, because if you're not sick but you're still spreading the virus, you won't know whether to put yourself into quarantine, whether to isolate yourself, and how many people you've exposed.
The reason I'm asking you this, Dr. Mukherjee, is because various theories are doing the rounds. And I'm still trying to understand, does the medical world really know what is the pathogenesis of this virus? Does it affect young or old, asymptomatic or symptomatic? Warm countries are better equipped to confront the viral than milder temperature countries. Do we really know what this enemy called corona is yet?
So the answer is we know little bits of it. We don't know all the information, but we know little bits of the information. Well, we know some of the patterns. We know that young people seem to have a milder disease, but let it be said that there are plenty of people in their 20s and 30s who have died from coronavirus. So although young people tend to have a milder version of the disease, for reasons that we really don't know, some young people have a very, very severe version of the disease. We heard of a young British nurse yesterday or day before yesterday, 25, 26 years old, who passed away, on having been on a ventilator. We know that older people are more susceptible. We know that if you have a pre-existing condition, including obesity, diabetes, immunosuppression, cancer, especially cancer patients who are receiving chemotherapy for their other cancers and are immune suppressed, they have a very high rate of severe illness. We know a lot about the virus. We know this. We now know the sequence of the virus. We know how many genes it makes. We know what the virus looks like. There are microscopic studies, and we know potential places that we'll come to drugs in a second, but we know potential places to attack the virus and a potential place to make a vaccine against the virus. But these take time. All of these things that have taken time. We have done this in truly record speed, faster than anything that I can remember. So we know a lot about the virus. We know a lot of features of the virus, but there are many things that are unknown.
One of those unknowns, of course, is what you just said, the drugs and the vaccine. Because, one of the theories for a cure is hydroxychloroquine. India has just exported it to the United States. Another theory, countries with BCG immunization programs like India are perhaps better equipped to take on the virus. How do you see it? Do we have a theory? There's much talk today of an American company which claims to have got a drug that could combat corona. Are we any close to having a drug or a vaccine? And is there any truth in hydroxychloroquine or indeed BCG vaccine theories?
So let's take those questions one at a time. Let me take a step back before I answer the question, and it will be a long answer. So just be prepared. When you develop a new drug against a virus or any microbe, there are, especially in the context of a pandemic, it really goes through certain phases. The first phase is a drug that can be developed from a previously existing human drug. So this is called drug repurposing. So in other words, the drug is already existing in the human pharmacopoeia. We repurpose it to use it for this virus. Those are the ones that come first, and the reason is that we know that their safety profile is likely to be the best. So there are several drugs in that category, but the two that stand out. One of them is hydroxychloroquine, as you said, and the second one is a drug called remdesivir from Gilead Pharmaceuticals. So let's take those two. We'll come back to those two in a second. So the first category, as I said, is repurposed drugs that have already been in humans. The second set of drugs that will come on are antibodies, not vaccines. These are antibodies that are made to specifically latch on to coronavirus. We know exactly where to latch on to because the viral structure has been solved for the most part, and the structure of the so-called spike protein, the part that attaches itself to cells, has been solved, and the domain, the subpart where it's most likely to work is now known. This will probably be a cocktail of vaccines, cocktail of antibodies, and they're being made right now by several companies. And we actually, Kiran Shaw of Biocon and I are in constant conversation to try and make these available in India under a licensing agreement. So you'll hear more about that in a second through Syngene, Biocon, etc. We are in almost daily conversations to license them and bring them. The trouble with antibodies is that they're much harder to make. It's not like making Tylenol or making penicillin or hydroxychloroquine. You have to produce them in these enormous tanks, almost the size of a swimming pool. And you have to keep them clean and decontaminated and extract out the antibodies. They are very likely to work. And we will see them in human trials probably in June at the earliest, because they take a lot of time to make. The third category is new drugs that we invent from scratch, new molecules. And there are several candidates there. These candidates usually, they attack the virus's capacity to make copies of itself. We should take a step back and say, oh, what is a virus? A virus is a piece of genetic material with a coat, which goes inside cells and then parasitizes the cell's genetic apparatus to make more and more copies of itself. That's what a virus is. So viruses have special genes in them, as well as the cell's genes that they use to make copies of themselves. So the third category, I'm sorry, I hope everyone's still following with me.
No, it's fascinating. Go ahead.
The third category are new drugs that are made from scratch by screening against specific parts of this virus copying machinery. Mm-hmm. These take even longer because the first step there is to go through safety studies in humans, the so-called phase 1 or even a phase 0 study, after you finish some animal studies to go through some human studies to ensure that in fact these work, and then phase 2 and phase 3 studies, randomized studies, to look at whether these work or not. The final category, the fourth one, is a vaccine. Mm-hmm. Vaccines take the longest time. They're, of course, the most effective in the context of a population, but they take a very long time because of several reasons. You have to get the right vaccine, you have to target the right protein, but most importantly, remember, you're giving the vaccine to people who have no disease. So your safety profile for a vaccine has to be extraordinary. So we usually, the fastest that we can generate a vaccine has been on the order of 12, 16, 18 months. And then you have to vaccinate people. That takes another 12 months, let's say, across the world. Mm-hmm. So you're really looking at a vaccine that is about 18, 20 months away. We are accelerating that at a massive speed, but you're really looking at a vaccine that's really about 20 months away at the latest.
So you're probably looking at it towards the end of 2021. There was an interesting quote of yours, Dr. Mukherjee, recently saying that if there is a drug or antibody, it should be produced in India. Just trying to understand what that means. What are you trying to say? Do you believe that the Indian medical system will throw up the drug, the vaccine?
Well, it certainly can, but right now, what the effort has been to find the best candidates and license them so that they can be made in India. And by licensing, you essentially approach. We have a consortium that we've created and has existed for a while, and licensing essentially allows us to bring that drug candidate to India to produce it, because if it's going to be an antibody, the world's capacity to produce it will be stretched because of the number of people that are involved. So everyone will have to pitch in. As I said, these are made in vats. You need a lot of training to make them. You need a facility that is certified to make them. And so it's not just a trivial production. And certainly everyone is involved. There are Indian scientists, there are scientists from Korea, from the United States, and everywhere involved. The hope is to take the leading candidates, whether it be the antibody or the small molecules, and try to produce them in India or import them in India. Importing is harder. Usually the prices are out of range of what Indian citizens can even pay. So right. the better model is to license it and have the license for India alone. And that can be done. It just takes time.
Let me, an interesting question from Naveen Bhardwaj, and I'm looking at the present now, not looking at 12 to 18 months when hopefully, as you said, 20 months from now, we might have a vaccine. Naveen Bhardwaj asks, what is the best strategy for this pandemic? Is it targeting herd immunity while deploying a new treatment, example, plasma therapy, to avoid fatalities? Or is it simply, as most countries are doing now, staying locked down with minimal economic activity? Is there...
Well, so first of all, there's no one solution, because it's a combination of solutions, and it'll have to be phased in. And this is why preparation is very important. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different opinions on this. Countries can only stay in lockdown for so long. So why are we doing a lockdown? Well, the point of the lockdown is that, as I said, if you don't do lockdown, the virus spreads exponentially. I gave you a number that's a shocking number: 40 days with full contact, and you get some number multiplied by 10 to the power of 17. More than the world's population by 100-fold. I should say more than the world's population by several thousand-fold. The point of the lockdown is to decrease that R0 value. It's to decrease, everything is to decrease the R0 value, because right now we don't have a therapy.
Right.
So a lockdown is basically a decrease of the R0 value. Now, why do you want to do that? because that way we don't overwhelm the hospital systems, because the only care that we have available right now for sick patients is supportive care. We don't have a medicine. And if you overwhelm the hospitals, the situation becomes like Italy or like Spain, where basically every hospital was totally overwhelmed by patients. By locking down or by shutting it down, you smoothen the curve of or lower the curve of the spread of the infection. Now, there are many strategies to get out of a lockdown. And there's a lot of debate about this. I have my own opinion about it. The first thing that I think that has to happen is that the only conditions where we can get out of lockdowns are, number one, testing. So test and detect and figure out what the real numbers are of the rate of infection, so that you can find out whether this is a pandemic in this community, this is a pandemic everywhere, this is a pandemic located in certain places in Delhi or certain places in Mumbai, or is it in all over? So that's one. Number two is quarantine and isolation of people who are virally infected, and that needs to be enforced. And that can be done using all sorts of technology. It can be done with low tech, high tech, however you want it, but it can be done. The third is masking. So you can lock yourself down, in your house, but you can also lock your respiratory system down. And by that, I mean, you can prevent the virus from coming in, and you can also prevent you from spreading the virus to other people. So when
lockdown,
I say
distancing, masking, I mean, the Indian system has been locked down, a fierce lockdown. It's also been, Dr. Mukherjee, masks are being made mandatory increasingly. Testing perhaps has not been done enough. So do you think that this is the sort of three-pronged strategy that any country must go through? Is it a one-size-fits-all strategy in that sense, at least as far as these 3 points go?
It's so exactly right, and phasing and constant testing. So phasing and constant testing is part of this. So as you open the lockdown, you need to test. You need to be able to isolate and quarantine and contact trace, so trace contacts. And number three, you need, I would say, as universal facial masking with the highest grade masks available or possible to be able to do this. It leaves a very important open question, which is what to do about children, because children are asymptomatic carriers. And locking down children, in other words, not getting them to school, is essentially locking down at least one of their parents, and usually the mother. For working mothers, this is an extremely difficult situation, because you can't have childcare at home as well as be working outside. So what do you do? So one solution that we've been thinking about is whether we could invent and also enforce masking for children in schools if you have to open schools. So again, the first phases of this it's not one size fits all, but the principles apply right across every country. As you remove a lockdown, you have to do it in phases. Masking, detection, and quarantine are going to be permanent parts of our lives for the next 6-8 months, as far as I can tell.
We've just got about 2-3 minutes, and I just want a few quick answers to a few questions that are coming in for you, Doctor. One of them is there any evidence that genetically South Asians might be less impacted by coronavirus? Does a gene predispose people to fall prey to certain values? This is obviously someone who's read your book on genes.
Yes, so there's a major effort. Going on right now to sequence several thousand genomes and look for susceptibility to coronavirus. The answer is going to be probably yes, but we don't know what those genes are. And we have no evidence thus far to know or understand whether South Asians are more protected or less protected. We just don't have the answers.
Siddharth, what's your prognosis of the future, of, dare I say, a post-corona world? Will it be a better, safer world, or a completely changed world? Ask Sakshi.
Well, it'll be a changed world for sure. We will be better prepared, hopefully, for the next pandemic, and we will be on the constant vigilance. I think we reacted late to this. Many countries reacted late to this, and that delay, as I said, was an exponential delay, and so we will see a changed world.
We'll see a changing world. One of those changes, Siddharth, and this is a question I want to ask. India invests just 1.2% in public health. doctors in many hospitals working in substandard hospitals. Do you believe one of those changes will be a reset where public health has to be put top of the agenda?
I think health and public health in general have to be put on top of the agenda. I mean, for a country of its size, 1.2% is a terrible number, and there is really, pandemic preparedness requires an enormous investment, and you see what happens when you don't prepare. Right. You may be saving your 1.2 billion odd dollars, but if you shut your economy for 1 day, you will expend that in days. So
right.
Absolutely, this is something that deserves more investment.
Very quickly, cancer stigmatized. Do you see corona being stigmatized?
Well, it's been stigmatized here. I mean, there's been racism against Chinese Americans who have nothing to do with the pandemic. I think the idea is that there will be a stigma attached to people who get infected. We should obviously, one of our jobs is to prevent that, but to also encourage them to be in quarantine as long as they can, so that they don't spread the virus.
Final question, at a personal level, how have you dealt with the corona challenge? I know that you are probably going to hospital as a health worker, so you're out and about. A lot of health workers I know affected in New York. Is that something that has been personally very difficult for you to deal with?
Well, for cancer patients, I'm an oncologist. My particular arena has been to keep them safe. It is to keep people who have immune compromise safe and try to maintain the protocols and the therapies that they're normally getting, even under very reduced circumstances. And we're trying our best. Right. But that's been the main impact. The hospitals have been, severely impacted.
I have a colleague who's asked a question. Chandni Dabas wants to know, Dr. Mukherjee, how much credence are you giving to the theories doing the rounds that this virus was made in a lab in China?
Well, I think it's very unlikely to have made in a lab in China. I think, the virus sequence resembles, as far as we know, viruses that are found endemically in bats. So I personally don't believe that. I know there's a lot of conspiracy theory around it. The virus sequence doesn't suggest that to me.
Final question. This is from Saloni asking, will we see Dr. Mukherjee write a book one day on meeting the corona challenge, a history of the virus, an intimate history of the virus?
Well, so, I'm a viral immunologist by training. My lab works on viruses, different viruses. I'm not a corona expert, but I work on different viruses and viral immunology. I have a book which has a big section on vaccines and viruses, but I don't think I'll be writing a history of the coronavirus, at least as far as I can tell.
Dr. Mukherjee, it's been a pleasure talking to you. You've given us a real sense of what the world is up against. You've taken time off at a very difficult time. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay well.
Well, let me just say that, the main thing that we want is to buy time for ourselves until we get a good drug, vaccine, or drug candidate. So if everyone can pitch in and buy us time, there are drugs coming. There is hope at this end of this tunnel. There are drugs coming. The vaccine will be there. There will be effective medicines. So just buy us time by preventing the spread of virus and deaths. That is everyone's job as a public citizen, is to buy us time and listen to the way that we're responding to the virus as a whole medical community. If you can buy us time, we are trying our best to make new drugs against this virus, and there will be a drug and an antibody and potentially a vaccine candidate.
That's a great message to send, a message of hope in a way. There will be a drug, there will be a vaccine. For now, simply buy time, stay home, stay safe. Dr. Mukherjee, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you here on the India Today eConclave. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.